About 25 years ago, a quarter century ago, Africa has started its transition toward democracy.
Really, for the last 15 years, Africa's economies have been extremely strong, and I think that the foundation of that strength is really in better governance.
Investing in education for the country as a part of your economic development strategy is so important, rather than looking at it in isolation.
One generation ago in Africa, a third of countries were democratic. Today, 2/3 are. And you might say to me that not all of them are truly democratic, but I'll say to you, it's heading in the right direction.
There's been an enhancement of democracy. That democracy has resulted into an enhanced governance of our public institutions, and that has resulted in a strengthening of our economic institutions.
At the same time, in the 80s and the 90s, Africa raised a lot of hope about its economic development. But when the price of commodity plunged, that hope actually evaporated. But this time around, we see an Africa that is actually experiencing the best growth in the world. And at the same time, going along with this and the lessons learned from the 60s, the 80s, we have a new generation of entrepreneurs in Africa, well-educated, that are working with the local governments to try to put into place policies and to create an environment that attract investments.
Then you get into the 80s, really with the end of the Cold War and multi-party democracy taking hold across the African continent. And that multi-party democracy obviously has continued today with a greater emphasis in the 90s and 2000s on building institutions, building good governance practices, and making the benefits of prosperity inclusive. And I think that's where we really are today. How can, in fact, more people be brought into the economic growth that Africa has experienced? How can that growth be more inclusive to society?
There's a lot of concern these days about macro weaknesses, global economy. Same applies to Africa, slump in resource prices and so on. But we are still very positive on Africa, and we think the opportunity is the micro level with the private sector in niche industries and niche sectors, and that's what we're looking for. Not the whole continent, it's looking at specific countries and within that specific sectors and trying to identify those private sector players that are the ones to take it forward. The private sector is going to be the generator of jobs or wealth in partnership with the government.
In 2004 and 2005, the list of issues for outside investors holding them back from investing in Africa were entirely related to governance, political stability, coup d'etat, macro issues related to governance. Today, those aren't the top few issues. The top few issues are issues like Mohammed mentioned, bribery, corruption, and micro issues. And the good news about micro issues is good management can resolve those issues.
The agenda should be strengthening the ability of African countries to produce and to produce competitively. For a long time, African countries have been seen as consumers as opposed to producers. And the rest of the world many times views Africa as a market. And sometimes even we in the country focus more on what we can spend. I think there's a sense in which we need to focus on the economic institutions that will enhance our ability to produce.